Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I'm going to try doing something this evening, and this is going to be a difficult because I'm going to try to explain something that's been annoying me, and then I'm concerned that what I'm learning is actually really dangerous to our society. And then we're going to walk through some of the latest budget numbers. Look, if you don't have a life and you're someone that watches C-SPAN, you've had to deal with me once a week coming up here and functionally doing economic lectures. And I don't mean to sound like a jerk. I'm just trying to make it so there's an understanding of the actual fiscal situation we are facing as a country. And a couple weeks ago, I did one, and boom. I didn't believe there was this many people that don't have a life on YouTube, but it has like 960,000 views. And I've been blessed. This has happened multiple times over the last couple of years. And then I made a mistake. I actually looked at some of the comments. And this started a couple of years ago. And you're going, well, that's not true. Well, that has to be a robot. Well, that's a bot. Well, that's completely. Well, why is that one written in horrible English? So we actually started a little project in our office a couple months ago trying to understand what is the foreign infiltration into our ability to communicate in our society. How many bad actors are basically filling up this thing with crap, with things that are completely not true? And it turned out we found academic article after academic article, Microsoft doing huge data analytics, all sorts of things out there that in many ways we're at war. We don't actually understand it, but we have a war going on, and it's a war for hearts and minds, and there are bad actors around this world. The number of data points we have here showing particularly China, Russia, Iran, and it's getting weaponized at a level I don't think any of us are intellectually ready for, because AI is here, the plain language is here, and they're moving off of just your Facebook page or your social media accounts. It is moving into now fake text messages, all sorts of other ways where they're going to try to pollute and take down the West. And we are not the only ones. We have map after map of what China just did to Taiwan. Now, Taiwan actually has built a policy on how to help combat it. They get attacked on social media with fake stuff. They have teams that turn around and say, okay, here's what they said, here's the documents, look it up yourself. I don't think we're ready for this. How do you and I and our brothers and sisters on the left and anyone that actually cares about this country, how do you have honest debates, honest discussions about in my case, I'm fearful of the crushing debt. We're going to walk through that. But other policy things, when you actually lay out facts, you lay out the information of what's going on, and 90 seconds later there's a bot that basically is putting out absolute crap. How do you hold a society together? Well, you can't even agree on the baseline facts to build the debate from, when article after article, and some of these are huge. I brought these are the executive summaries. I mean, some of the ones we've gone through are hundreds of pages of tracking entire troll farms. There's one document here saying that China may be spending multiple billions of dollars in influence operations here in this country to basically distort reality. And the point I'm going at right now, this seems like a weird place to go for a guy that wants to talk about the numbers of what's happening in our government. I'm incredibly frustrated because I do not know how we have an honest debate when we have a disinformation wave coming at us from functionally governments, let alone the private troll farms that do it just for clickbait to make money. But how do you have an honest debate when our brothers and sisters, our constituents at home, our activists see things that are absolutely not true? We're going to have to find out some way for us to have a commonality of these are the facts. Or how do I hate to say this, how do I make the public absolutely cynical? Don't believe me. Don't believe the crap on your, the crap on your phone. Look up yourself. Find things you trust and confirm it. Because we have articles after articles here documenting the troll farms, documenting the new bot farms, documenting the use of new AI. And this one is actually sort of scary because it's going to be industrialized. You think things are screwy right now? Wait a couple more months when we're in the middle of the election season. And this government here has already decided look what Russia's done to Ukraine, what people believe about Ukraine. Look what the Palestinians and their teammates in Iran, and oddly enough, coming through China, are doing to Israel. We're going to have to grow up and deal with the reality of it is much of the information that's coming smashing into this country isn't real. And we're going to have to become much more discerning on it. So look, that's my caveat. Please, because we have such incredibly difficult things to deal with, and there's hope. But it's hard. I've said a dozen times behind this microphone, a family saying used to be, for every hard, difficult problem, there's a simple solution. That's absolutely wrong. It turns out complexity often requires complexity. But we have hope if we just get off our high knees and actually start to deal with the reality. So look, let's walk through some of the reality of United States math right now. We made this chart today. It's accurate, but it's also missing a couple things. But the point I want to make here is, you see this blue area? That's what a member of Congress gets to vote on. That's defense, and that's what we call non-defense discretionary. That's the Park Service, that's the FBI, that's the State Department, this. See all that red? None of that gets a vote from a member of Congress. The vast majority of our spending is on autopilot. And this interest number here is actually the net number, not the gross number, because there's another $300 billion or so that's actually borrowed from the trust funds that we still have to pay back. We still have to pay interest, but we just sort of hide that, where other European countries actually have to tell the truth about their total borrowing. How do we as members of Congress go home and explain every dime you as a member of Congress vote on is borrowed? Every dime we vote on. And if you use my projections on the borrowing for this year, $800 billion of Medicare is borrowed. And the economy is actually okay. How can we be at the current GDP, and I didn't check GDP now on the Atlanta Fed before I walked in here, but I think it was like 2.4, 2.5, which is actually a fairly decent GDP growth considering where interest rates are and those things. And yet, a couple days ago, we were breaking in, and forgive me, I'm going to do this slightly out of order to make a point. Nope, I don't even have it. Somehow the board didn't come. In the last week, we've had 2 times where we went over $100,000 a second in borrowing. Every second, we were borrowing over $100,000. It came down a little bit today. Today, I think we're back to like $98,000 a second. And that's over a 12-month period. That's 365 days of borrowing, averaging it out, dividing it down so you know what per second. If I had come to this body a couple years ago and says, we're going to be borrowing $100,000 a second, you would have thought I was out of my mind. But we're doing it. $100,000 a second is our borrow rate. And there's my anger, is we will have honorable debates here and this and that, but we're often debating over a couple minutes worth of borrowing because we're unwilling to talk about the driver of debt. It's interest and healthcare. Well, there's not a lot we can do about interest because here's how bad the interest numbers continue to be for us. I did this board a couple weeks ago, actually a month ago, and I was saying my math is gross interest will be $1,067 billion. And I got some crap for it. How can you say that? Well, you'll be happy to know that yesterday the Treasury announced, no, Schweikert was wrong. Interest will be $1,143.6 trillion. I underestimated it. And if you saw what interest rates did this week with the higher inflation data, the number is going to go higher. Understand the hierarchy right now. Social Security is going to spend $1,450 billion, but that's how tax receipts and the trust fund. Now, the trust fund is going to be gone in 8-9 years. But right now, it's self-contained. Interest is the second biggest spend in this government. You know what the third is? It's Medicare. Defense is now number 4. And because I know every member of Congress here sits around and doesn't have a life and reads, this is the MedPAC report from last week. And yes, I'm an idiot. I read it. There's one thing in here I wanted to make the point because I'm trying to get my head around this. In 2022, way back then, Medicare was 13% of functionally income tax, corporate tax receipts. 13%. In 5 more budget years, Medicare spending will be 22% of all income tax, all corporate taxes. That's a remarkable movement. We had a data point a couple days ago saying Medicare spending is up 10% this year. But we're not allowed to talk about that. It's an earned benefit. You worked in America, it's just like Social Security. You worked your 40 quarters, you earned it. But that doesn't mean we have to lie to each other. Just as I'm angry about the foreigners polluting our information set, we do something similar. We avoid telling the truth because the math is uncomfortable. And we're talking trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars here. Maybe the debates on this floor shouldn't be around rounding errors. It should be taking on the actual drivers of our debt. And now back to the point. Even here, I'm actually having to adjust. So now we actually believe what we call net interest. Now let me explain the difference between gross and net. Net interest is where we have to sell bonds. We have to get your pension system, your personal wealth, a nice family in Japan buying U.S. debt. Gross is where we sell the bonds over here, and then over here we're borrowing from the trust funds, even though we have a little technical problem. The Transportation Trust Fund, the Medicare Part A Trust Fund, the Social Security Trust Fund, all are gone this decade. Well, in the next 9 years, they're all gone. It's math. Is it acceptable that this has become a math-free zone? And these numbers, when I was starting to show these a couple months ago, and the inbound silliness we'd get, stop making up numbers. Yeah, you're right. I missed them. I wasn't dark enough. CBO will be updating all these numbers because it turns out interest has gotten more expensive. Today's interest rate, we're back up to the highs, almost to the highs of last November. They haven't been going down, they're going the other direction. And you all saw the head of Chase Bank, Jamie Dimon, in part of his report to shareholders this last week saying, his economists believe there's a very good chance interest rates are going higher. And look, and put these down, and I'll try not to hit anyone with them. Please look at this chart. Please look at this. You see this line over here? This is 1975 to 2001. The average on U.S. sovereign debt was 7.5%. The average for all those years was 7.5%. That was actually the average, considering. Now, I accept that has some of the 1980s, Paul Volcker, but that was the average. Then go 2001 to 2022. Absolutely suppressed interest rates. We lived in a fantasy world. It was down to 2.2. Okay. That's your juxtaposition. What is the real interest rate? What's the real cost of money here? We're only right now at 3.3. Our economists in the Joint Economic Committee, Republican side, and even myself, we're trying to figure out where it's going. We don't think it's going down. We need to somehow understand the reality. If you're borrowing $100,000 a second, do you think there's lots of liquidity out there to see your interest rates come falling? What would happen to the United States debt when you functionally have a total of 35.7 or 34.7? Actually, in May, we go to 35. In September, we'll be over 36 because we're clicking off about $1 trillion of borrowing about every 110, 115 days right now. Think about that. What happens if the interest rates go anywhere back to their historic norm? Are we allowed to tell our constituents the truth? It's just, it breaks my heart because there is a path, but you have to be willing to be disruptive, almost a revolutionary. You have to be willing to be moral in saying, okay, if these are the cost drivers, the actual cost drivers, not the theatrics. I always love it when I go and read some of the comments. If you just got rid of your salaries, fine, maybe we're overpaid. Trust me, for our work product, we are. But it's 2.6 seconds a day of all borrowing. Foreign aid is about 5 days of borrowing. And there's the fantasy. And then there's the other side, the Democrats. Well, tax rich people. Okay, fine, have at it. You've seen I've done the economic studies multiple times here on the floor showing that you take your own plans, $400,000 and up, and maximize every tax. Maximize the state tax, capital gains tax, income taxes. Just do it all. Maximize it to the revenue producing maximum, and then do the economic adjustment. You get 1.5% of GDP. That's the studies. 1.5% of GDP. We're borrowing over 9.6 right now. If someone out there is brilliant and you have an easier way to explain this, please send it to me, because I feel like I'm just treading water here where people look at you and go, oh, Schweikert, you did another speech on the floor. That was interesting. I didn't watch, though. And you start to understand that when you do the comparisons of where we're heading, this is one. When you start to see numbers saying in 9 budget years, you're going to have $62 trillion of borrowing. That's what we're trying to compare. And we're slicing the difference between our projection and the CBO baseline. But the punchline here, the president's budget in 9 budget years has us at $70 trillion, and the CBO has us at $62 trillion. Sorry, trillion, not billions, trillions. That's 9 budget years from now. Am I the only idiot here that's terrified? This is moral, but we're going to engage in theatrics that's not even a day's worth of borrowing, even an hour's worth, maybe minutes worth of borrowing, Because that's what we're willing to debate over, because we're terrified to stand in front of our audiences and say, unless we revolutionize the cost of health care, I can't make the numbers work. So what are you willing to do? And that's with all the leftist taxes. And you start to also look, because the other day I was taking inbound from one of my Democrat friends. Well, you had the tax cut. Have you seen your own numbers on even just the Inflation Reduction Act? Seriously, where you're right down here, oh, that's going to only cost $20 billion, and then the next year it will be $14 billion, and the actual now number projections, where some of the years it's over $120 billion outlays. That's cash money, subsidies to corporate America. They basically bought the love of multinational corporations. God bless them. And it's more than the entire 10-year cost of the tax reform that actually spread out wealth. But they can't admit that. But even, I'm sending them in my own rules, because I keep coming here and saying, maybe we should spend less time litigating the past and deal with the reality of our demographics and the math right now. So let's take a look at some of the things that we're up against. Why is the public so cranky? Seriously, I try to have this conversation with folks at home, and I'm blessed. I represent the Phoenix, Scottsdale area. If you have to represent a district, I represent one of the most beautiful spots, particularly in the winter months. I represent a fairly prosperous district. I represent a really well-educated district, a really entrepreneurial district, and yet a lot of my folks who do, if you see on the surface, they're doing fairly well in life, and they're stressed out of their minds. Because in my district, we've had the highest inflation in the continental United States. If you do not make 23.6% more money today than you did the day President Biden took office, you are poorer. So no matter what economic data the clown show, body of Congress wants to talk about, over and over and over, oh, jobs are this, unemployment's this. This is what matters. When you actually look at the data of those who are non-supervisory or supervisory, today they are poor, even when you put back in wage growth. Our brothers and sisters in America are poor today. And in my district, it's worse. And I have a prosperous district. You want to understand why people are struggling and angry and frustrated. Maybe an honest conversation that we made them poor. So here's a bit of an intellectual tease. What's the biggest tax hike in modern history? Come on, what's the biggest tax hike in modern history? Let's work through this. If I came to you right now and said, the $1,000, the $100, the dollar you've saved up, and over the next 3.5 years, we're going to basically take away almost a quarter of its value. We made you poorer, right? That's called inflation. But where did that value go? It went to the debtors. Who's the biggest debtor in the world? United States. We functionally transferred your wealth through inflation and devalued the debt. The problem is now we hit the interest rate cycle. So we were devaluing the debt by inflation, and now the financing of our debt explodes, as well as the fact, and this is one that's a little trickier to talk about, Social Security, Medicare, these other things have kickers for inflation in there. So you get a short-term benefit. So you saw a little spike, about a year and a half ago, when debt to GDP, even though the debt was higher, but the GDP had sort of grown, but it's because the differential because of inflation. Now, all that benefit's gone, and now it's getting really ugly because the financing of the debt, I just showed you, if you do the gross number, is on its way to $1.2 trillion just this year. Interest now is the second biggest expense in our government. And in a little while, you got to understand, back to my fixation of we need to find some way to add technology, disruption, cures to disrupt the cost of health care. Because guess what, Mr. Speaker? In a few years, actually, Medicare even passes Social Security in total spending. So the hierarchy used to always be Social Security is number one, defense is number two, Medicare is number three, and interest was actually way down here. Now, interest is number two, but Social Security is number one. In just a few years, the health care costs will be the number one expense in this country. Just Medicare. This isn't adding in Indian Health Services, the VA, Medicaid. Now look, much of it's demographics. This is where maybe there's a problem, is we're so busy attacking the left is so busy attacking us. The fact of the matter is people getting older, moving into their earned benefits, is that Republican or Democrat? It's demographics. We know it's going to happen. We've known there was 67 million baby boomers. For how long? 65 years. And we did brilliant planning for it, didn't we? But understanding charts like this, it's coming, it's in front of us, and we will do everything we can to ignore it. This chart is a little hard to read, but I'm trying to make a point, and this actually uses some of the math from our colleagues on the left. As we get near the 8-year window, 10-year window, we get back closer to 18%. This is just structural, 18% of GDP coming in as taxes. Okay? Yet, the debt continues to grow even with that, because substantially interest keeps growing and the other expenses, particularly driven by, once again, healthcare costs. So unless we're willing to tell the truth, how do you take on the problem? And this one's actually this one's more for my Republican brothers and sisters. In 2023, how many times have you heard one of us get up and say, growth? Growth is incredibly important. And you can spike growth by cleaning up the immigration system, moving to a talent-based, but not importing massive poverty. You can do other things, such as getting regulations, adopting, using technology as much of your regulator instead of armies full of bureaucrats and file cabinets. There's dozens of things you can do policy-wise to create growth. But if you have someone that says, but we'll just grow ourselves out of borrowing $100,000 a second, they are not good at math. Here's the basic, simple rule. GDP, the size of the economy, in 2023 grew $1.5 trillion. Yay! But you do understand, for that growth, you only get 17, 18, maybe even 19% of that in tax receipts. So in the growth, that's wonderful, but it's not dollar for dollar. And so I will get people that say, okay, you guys borrowed $2.5 trillion, but the economy grew 1.5. Yes, it did grow 1.5, but I only get 17, 18, 19% of that in tax receipts. Do you understand the scale of growth you'd have to have for the tax receipts to come close to the borrowing? But that would require elementary school math, wouldn't it? Sorry. And back to the baseline. Our brothers and sisters are struggling. Many of them are having, if you're in markets like I am, where housing costs have gone up dramatically, parts of your food budget have gone up dramatically, we have Americans who are struggling. I showed the inflation numbers. And into that headwind, we have to find a way to stabilize the borrowing to that growth of the economy At the same time, we have to find a way to get beyond the liars out there that are trying to pollute the debate because they want to see this country fail. And if we don't step up and do our job, start telling people the truth, realize there is a path to stabilize our debt to GDP, and this could be a stunning century for America. But my fear is when I look at the debt spiral that's coming, if interest rates continue to go where they're going, you maybe have 3 years, 5 years. And at that point, then, most of what this government does is we've handed over the power of this government to the bond market. Because the bond market will be in charge of us, because the bond market will decide what our priorities are. Because they will control the price of our debt, they will control our resources. Make a decision. Are you willing to act like adults, digest facts, vet, double-check your facts, and then demand members of Congress start thinking like it's impolite to curse behind the mic. Start thinking in a way where they're willing to do difficult things that are accurate on their calculator and not their feelings. Because you can't make public policy with feelings and have it actually work out on your calculator. And as the old family saying for the Schweikert household, the math will eventually win. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Chọn đêm nay để nhớ thương anh. Em nghe tình yêu thức dậy êm đềm, nhớ từng nụ cười ánh mắt, nhớ lời ngọt ngào âu yếm, tóc em thơm giấc ngủ dịu. Biết giờ này anh có nhớ em không? Có nghe tình yêu thức dậy trong lòng? Đêm từng màu thời gian đến, bóng hình người mình yêu mến. Ôi nhớ gì hơn nhớ người yêu. Rất chân thành ước nguyện trọn đời yêu anh, chớ đừng giận hơn em nhé. Anh ơi đừng bao giờ nói chia lìa, sẽ làm tội nghiệp em lắm. Đã thương nhau chớ phụ tình nhau. Thức trọn đêm nay để nhớ thương anh. Sương rơi lạnh câm cảnh vật im lìm. Ước gì mình đừng ngăn cách, ước gì nhà mình chung vách. Hai đứa mình thức trắng đêm nay. thành, ước nguyện trọn đời yêu anh, chớ đừng giận hờn em nhé. Anh ơi, đừng bao giờ nói chia lìa, sẽ làm tội nghiệp em lắm. Đã thương nhau chớ phụ tình nhau, thức trọn đêm nay để nhớ thương anh. Sương rơi lạnh câm cảnh vật im lìm, ước gì mình đừng ngăn cách, ước gì nhà mình chung vách, hai đứa mình thức trắng đêm nay. Ước gì mình đừng ngăn cách, ước gì nhà mình chung vách, hai đứa mình thức trắng